Good afternoon everyone, it's great to see lots of people here. I could talk for hours and hours, weeks and weeks about how to paint a yacht, but I'm going to try and do it in 20 minutes, so if it's a little bit rushed, come and ask me questions at a later stage. I'm Roger Bolton, I've been with International, paid about 13 years, but I've been painting boats about 20, so that's all these grey hairs, that's all it is, the pressure of painting boats. Here's Kate Moss, my assistant, my colleague. So
thanks, Rog. I'm actually a chemist, so I spent about 10 years formulating anti-fouling paints and things like that. But together, we're going to try and share some knowledge with you. We're going to take you through a few do's and don'ts, how to choose the correct system, things like that, before taking you through a step-by-step, day-by-day application process.
At the beginning of any paint job, we need to decide whether it's a single part paint or a two-part paint. What I mean by that, we've got two different options. So the two-part paints, this one here, in the bottom we have the base and in the top we have a curing agent. This is generally tends to be a harder and longer lasting paint, or the traditional single pack spirit based top coat finish. Just so everyone's aware, the PBO yacht out there, that's actually got a two-pack paint system on.
The two-pack paint has a bit of a nasty smell, so today we've chosen to do a single-pack paint application at the front of the demo here. Otherwise, you'd all feel a little bit worse for wear, or hide. Okay, so the actual substrate that your boat is built out of also makes a difference when it comes to choosing what paint you need to use. The majority of boats are made out of GRP, but also there's wood and steel and aluminium. So, in the back of our boat painting guides, we have some schemes which are split down from two-pack paints and one-pack paints, and they're also split with different substrates. So you've got wood, aluminium, steel, and GRP. These schemes will tell you exactly what products to use, in which order, and exactly how many coats to apply. So the substrate condition also makes a difference. So talking specifically about GRP here, old, aged gel coat can quite often become quite porous. So the PBO boat out there, the top, sort of the decks and the coach roof area, was really rather UV damaged and sort of soft. So they've actually sealed that in with a two-pack primer. Now if the gel coat is in good condition, you shouldn't need to apply the primer, and you can just go straight on with undercoat. So for today's purposes, we're going to assume we've got a good condition gel coat that just needs a new look of paint, a bit of sort of a fresh look, a breath of fresh air bringing to it. So, the first thing you need to think about is preparing your GRP, your gel coat. So the most important thing is to degrease it. So there'll be a build-up of polish and wax, the mold release agent, suntan lotion, if you're lucky enough, diesel, oil, all sorts of nasty stuff. So you need a really strong degreaser. This will basically stop, otherwise if you don't get rid of all of that contamination, when it comes to sanding, you'll actually be sanding in all of that sort of diesel and wax into the coating, and then you'll never get anything to stick to it. So you also need to think about painting in good conditions. Obviously in the UK that's pretty tricky, but temperature-wise, the optimum temperature is around 18 degrees C. You can paint down to around 10 degrees C and probably up to around 25 degrees C, but at these extremes the paint doesn't really flow out as much. Or maybe when it's sort of hot, it'll dry too quick for it to flow out, and you'll get brush marks. Also, don't paint in direct sunlight. Don't paint when it's about to rain. Sounds obvious, but if rain's imminent, don't paint. Any kind of moisture that gets on the surface, that'll knock the gloss off when it's dry. You'll regret it. Time of day. So try and paint early in the morning, around 10 AM. This gives the coating a good day to cure before you get the evening moisture forming on it. That'll help when it comes to keeping the gloss level high. Temperature of the paint. A lot of people leave the paint out in their garage and then expect it to perform wonders when it's freezing cold. Leave it in the house, perhaps in the airing cupboard, for a couple of days beforehand, and then when you apply it, it'll flow out a lot better. Rog, I think you've seen a couple of people try and warm it on the hob.
Yeah. There was one instance when we walked to the boat and the chap said, well, I said to the chap, where's the paint? And he went, well, it's on the cooker. And I went, are you serious? He said, yes. And before we got up, it was actually on the boat, it was there, warming and bubbling away. It's a wonder he didn't kill himself. So, we've got to plan this application. We're not just going to turn up to the boat, open the can of paint and get it on. We've got to seriously think about this. We've got to think about, most importantly, the wet edge of the paint. So, if we're going to do a topsides and we're right-handed, we generally start at the bow on the starboard side. So when we work across the area, we're going to work into that wet edge. So if we're left-handed, we're going to start on the opposite side and work our way along. More importantly, when we've got cockpits or superstructures to do, we're going to have to start thinking about hard edges we need to start and stop on, or even in a cockpit. There was once when we were walking through the boatyard and we had this, "Is anybody there? Anybody there?" And then we looked up and there was this chap with a can of paint and a brush in his hand, and he painted himself in the cockpit. He couldn't get out. So again, on the cockpit, we've just got to make sure that we work our way off that boat. So we're talking about masking. Like I say, any edges should be masked. Always use a good quality masking tape. We should always use something like a 3M, what else we got, Mercer, any good quality tape. The brown beige tape, I would stay well clear of. Another thing when we're going to start looking at the top size paint is this bit at the waterline. Hopefully everyone can visualise what we've got here, but when we come with the anti-fouling, it's important that we butt together the top side paint and the anti-fouling paint. Otherwise we will have an issue of the solvent in that anti-fouling attacking the top coat. So to do a job like the professionals, we need the right equipment. I've just briefly spoken about tape, but we've got to look at brushes, we've got to look at rollers. You know, there's all sorts of rollers that we can get off in the marketplace. But if we're looking at doing the top sides with a gloss, a good closed cell foam roller will help. These other type of rollers that you do see, yes, they are appropriate maybe for undercoats, but definitely not finishes, because they will put quite a textured surface in it. So we do need something that will put the paint on nice and even. With the brush, we can use a synthetic type brush that we've got here. We can use a badger type brush. The badger type ones are very difficult to get hold of nowadays, so synthetic, you know, they've got nice bristles, they don't splay out too much, they remain nice and compact, and at the end they're nice and soft, so that'll help the paint flow. So there are other equipment around, paint pads, Jenny brushes, those foam type ones. Yes, everybody's got their way of painting, but with a good roller and a good brush, we'll get a decent finish, just like the professionals. You see me got ovals on. There's no doubt that even just by doing these panels, I will get paint on me. We need a good pair of nitrile gloves. Don't use the latex type ones. They'll start to disintegrate. These ones will protect you. Maybe a dust mask. That's more important, I suppose, for more sanding. Glasses. I do have a set on me. We could get splashes to the eyes. So this is where we get to the good bit. So, before we do any painting, we've assessed the surface. We're going to start looking at, we've degreased it, we've cleaned it, but to get the paint to adhere, we need a mechanical bond. So we would abrade the surface with a 180 grit paper, and we would use, in the industry, like a DA sander. You could use a block sander, but the square type vibrating ones, they tend not to produce such an even surface. They can sort of gouge away at the surface. So once the surface has been abraded, we'd then remove the dust, and we would apply, in this instance we're going to talk about gel coat, GRP, we'd apply one coat of primer. This is called pre-coat.
So undercoating is a really important part of the process. The undercoat is basically there to provide a really uniform finish before you put on the top coat. So undercoat is chock full of pigment. This means it's got really good hiding, so it'll cover up the sort of imperfections and colour of the substrate underneath. But also, because it's got so much pigment in, it's really quite easy to sand. So therefore, when you sand it down, you get this really nice, perfectly smooth finish, which allows you to put the top coat on and get the best finish. Preparation is probably about 80% of the job, I'm afraid. Everyone hates sanding, I know, but it is really important to get a super smooth surface before you put the top coat on. So as you can see, Rog here is giving the undercoat a really, really good stir. As I said, it's really highly pigmented, so it's important to give it a really good stir. You can honestly spend about 5 minutes stirring it, and that probably would be about enough.
I would say the paint that you do get from our factory is very, very fresh, so shouldn't get any lumps in it. That's a good drop of paint, that.
He needs to get out more than this. So when it comes to the undercoat, the best way to apply it is by roller. You do get quite an orange peely finish, but as I said, it's really easy to sand, so sanding it out should be no problem at all. So you can see he's really loading the roller up before he starts to apply. You don't want it to go on and sort of be really patchy. You want to properly load the roller up. The same goes with the brush. Quite often you really need to work the brush in to make sure that the core of the brush is loaded with paint and not dry. So that's as easy it is. As easy as it is, it's not particularly exciting, and you can't really see it because it's got a white background. Right, let's crack on.
There we go. It's easy as that. We've only got another 50 feet to do.
Filler time.
So, we've done a bit of undercoating, but we've got some damage. I don't know if anybody could see that. So we've applied the pre-coat. We're still going to take the nicks and the dings and any blemish out of the surface. So this is where we start to look at filling it. So we've got a 2-pack epoxy. This one's called watertight. We have a base and a curing agent. It's a 1-to-1 mix. So already comes supplied with a spatula. So it's like I said, it's a 1-to-1 mix. Then we take some of the curing agent. So now we need to try and get that mixed evenly. You can see the 2 distinct colours, but now we need to slowly mix that together. A lot of people in the industry still use polyesters. I would steer away from the polyester fillers because they do shrink considerably, somewhere in the region about 10 or 15%. But this will hardly shrink, most probably in the region about 1 or 2, hardly at all.
Would you say, Rog, that for a really, really small, sort of a 1 or 2 mil deep little indentation, then a polyester filler would be okay?
That's certainly acceptable, yes.
But anything more than sort of 5 mil, then you want to start using a solvent-free epoxy filler.
Go nice and hard as well, and sand's tremendously easy. But always mix as much as you need. We could go a long way with this. So obviously mixed too much. Get a good spatula, and it's always good to like slightly overfill, because if we underfill, we're going to have to go back and fill it again. So overfill. Try not to go too hard, and you can't really see it from there, but by pushing so hard, it will pull it actually out of the damage. And across again. Try and remove the excess. With a slightly bigger blade to get it across.
Always blaming the poor equipment.
There you go. I would say that was near perfect. Good. Done.
Okay, so this is day 2. So on day 1 you've done your pre-coat. Oh no, that's one thing. Day 2 you've done your watertight. Day 3 you want to sand your watertight. So sand it back with 180 grit sandpaper. You will inevitably sand through the undercoat, and you can see that in this portion here. Don't worry too much because you will be undercoating again.
So once we've abraded that, it's nice and smooth. We're going to come and look at doing a 50-50 mix with undercoat. We're going to seal that all back with another coat. Now, doing a 50-50 mix is a tried and tested way of doing an undercoat. It actually produces a much better gloss at the end of the day because it's a harder system. With a normal undercoat, it's quite a sort of a softish type coating, and will suck in that top coat. But having a 50-50 mix will hold the top coat nice and well.
So this is a real professional top tip, this 50-50 mix. And as Rog said, the undercoat, it's because of all of that pigment loading in the undercoat that makes it really quite suck it, well, I don't really know what the technical term is, but it literally sucks in the top coat when you put it on.
Okay, so I'm going to put a drop of undercoat. And I'll just tint it with the top coat.
This is also a really good trick to start building up the colour before you put the top coat on. So, as you can see, we've got this white undercoat, but we want to have a blue finish. So by mixing the two together, you then start to bring the colour through. This creates a real depth to the finish, but also if you inevitably do have some dings and scratches, you won't see the sort of white undercoat through. You'll get this a softer colour. So again, application by roller, brush in the hard to reach areas. All of these paints are formulated specifically for brushing and rollering. So all of the flow characteristics should be there for rollering, given that as long as you apply them at the right temperature.
Okay, I'm obviously going to do it slightly differently. I'm not going to do it the proper way, so I just want to show you the application of what this will actually look like.
Cool.
So this will actually dry to a sort of matte satin finish. It won't be full gloss because obviously we've got the undercoat in it as well.
So Roger's applying this onto actually what is our blue-grey undercoat. This is effectively the second coat of undercoat, so it's been applied on top of the blue-grey undercoat. So
once that's been left for a couple of days, we'll then really want it to harden up. If we touch that with any abrasive, which will be a 320, we come back the next day, it will be cheesy, and that is the technical term we use. When you rub it with the abrasive, it balls up on the back of the paper like little pieces of cheese. So it's better to wait about 48 hours. We can then come back and it will dust up nicely on the back of the abrasive. So always leave it about 48 hours.
One quick thing to mention though is you really need to do an opacity check after your second coat of undercoat. So what I mean is, any kind of repairs that you've made, if they have any kind of ghosting through, so up here you can see this slight shadow here, so this is two coats of undercoat over a repair, but as you can see there's this ghosting. Now that will be visible in the final finish, so the undercoat, it's crucial that you've got to get the complete same colour all the way over. Now there's no harm in doing a bit of a spot undercoat on this as a third coat. So after you've applied your second coat of undercoat, physically walk around the boat, see if there are any spots, and spot undercoat them after you've left the second coat of undercoat to dry after about 24 hours. So we're on to day 5, which is the day where you've sanded down your pre-coat. The way to tell that it's all sanded down is it starts off being quite a satin finish, but when you've sanded it down using your DA sander, it becomes this matte finish. Now another top tip is to use a soft pad. So you can buy soft pads that go between your sandpaper and your sander. So this basically stops you putting any pressure onto the surface. So especially where it's curved, it's really you're putting a lot of pressure on the centre of the sander, and this soft pad will basically stop you sanding through the undercoat. On edges, these are the points where it's going to be thinnest, the coating. So hand sand these because you will go through. And in fact, I think on here you can see the white where I sanded it. So you're on to day 5. You've sanded down your pre-coat with 320. You need to wash that well with water. Give it a good day to dry, I would. Basically, as I was saying earlier, you need to apply the top coat about 10 AM in the morning. If you're going to sand down the pre-coat and apply the top coat in the same day, you're going to have a hell of an early start in order for it to dry by about 10 AM, ready for you to paint your top coat. So assuming you've left it to dry, you're now on to day 6. So Rog here is applying the first coat of top lap. So he's poured it into the tray and he's really saturated his roller. Remember he was saying he's right-handed, so he started at the starboard bow of the boat and he's working his way back. Now he's going to work in about half-metre sections. So So from the stem, £1/2 metre.
Cheap rollers again. Don't know who brought them.
It's like a comedy show. So he's going to work in about £1/2 metre sections, rollering them on, and then he's going to tip off. When you roller it, you get a really, really bubbly finish. And basically, the way to get rid of those bubbles is to tip them off with a brush. This is called the rolling and tipping method. It's fairly well known. So you roll it in your £1/2 metre sections, you then go back and you tip them off. Now the brush, you've really saturated the brush with paint. Make sure that centre core has got paint on it. You don't want to use the brush to apply more paint, you just want to have a wet brush. So this photo here shows the kind of pressure he's putting on the hull with the brush. So you want to do downward strokes, vertical, always vertical. Downward tends to be easier because you can really get the brush into the toe rail, just underneath the toe rail, and do a downward stroke. Now the first stroke, you can see in the picture, is really quite firm and you're physically pulling through the paint. The second stroke is really much lighter. So Roger, can you demonstrate that?
Can I just bring the wet edge in?
Oh, the wet edge.
So we've got the bit with the bubbles on, the bit with our just tipped off, the wet edge, we've got to bring that in. Go quite hard, bring that in, just to mix the paint, otherwise we'll get quite a thick layer of paint, so that'll just even that out there. And then we can start to just tip off. Even in here, it's the paint's quite sticky, so it could do with thinning a bit.
So you see he's coming back and he's doing his second stroke, which is a lot lighter than his first stroke. Now, the reason you work in about £1/2 metre sections is because it really starts to sort of, well, become too late to put the brush in it after really a matter of minutes. So by working in half metre sections, you're still giving time for the paint to flow out after you've tipped off. Now if you get any kind of sags, insects, bristles, and they're not in the section that you're working in at the moment, leave them. Don't be tempted, I know it is so tempting, but don't be tempted to go and flip them out, because as soon as you start brushing that defect in, you'll get a horrible finish because those brush marks won't flow out, whereas the sag you'll barely notice. So if they're not in the section you're working, leave them, walk away. One other thing to mention is that it's a lot quicker to do the job if there's two of you. So Roger's having to do the rollering and the tipper-offering, I don't think that's a technical word, by himself, but if you've got two people, one person can roller and the other person can come along behind and tip off. Be aware of the speed that you're both going, so the rollerer doesn't get ahead of the tipper-offerer, because it won't flow out. As soon as you start brushing paint that's been there for more than literally a minute or so, it won't flow out. If you can incorporate the toe rail into this application, then do so. If you can't, then you've got a nice hard line to tape up, so you can do it in 2 different applications. This is day 6 and you've applied your first coat of top lac. Now, the finish, you might have some brush marks, you might have some defects. Give it 2 days to cure, and then you can sand those defects out. So you can use 400 up to about 600 grit sandpaper, but you really only want to sand the paint where the defect is. If you haven't got any defects or dust, then don't sand it because you're just getting rid of good paint, basically. But the surface tension of, this is a 1 coat of top lac, the surface tension of this is such that when you paint the next coat on, it won't really flow out, it'll sort of sit on the surface. So a good technique is to Scotch-Brite the surface. This is a really quite abrasive kind of, but yet doesn't really, it just scratches the surface.
Can everybody see that? See what I've done to the surface, just put a tiny haze on it. It's just, like Kate said, it's just broken up that surface tension. So now, when I put the next paint on, it will grab hold of that fresh coat of paint and help it flow out also. You can also use 400 grit sandpaper for that process. I'm going to use something called a tack rag. It should be nice and clean, it should be relatively clean, and that take off the nice dust particles, but don't push too hard, otherwise you'll impart the wax.
So Rog here is applying the second coat of top lac, and with exactly the same method as before, so starting in the same place. One thing to mention, at the stem, you've got basically 2 options. The first option is to drop a line of masking tape down the stem, paint up to it, and then when you finish that section, you can whip that bit of masking tape away. The second option is to just lightly flick the paint around the stem, and then when you come round you can lightly flick the other way and it will sort of blend in. It really depends on the shape of your stem and kind of personal preference whether you feel happy to flick the paint around. One other thing to mention, masking tape. He's mentioned using good quality masking tape, but try and take it off as soon as you can. Definitely that day. If you leave it any longer, it has danger of pulling everything with it.
Do I always pull it up vertically? Yes, to set the paint against gravity. But then some people will want to pull it down, like from this way to just. And again, some people do it horizontally, but you tend to have a lot of wet edges. So yeah, up will always take it up against gravity. Yeah.
So again, applying that second coat top lacquer at about 10 AM in the morning to give it a good day to cure. So you've seen these pictures. You now should be ready to put her back in the water, to be honest. Give her a few days to dry, probably a bit longer. And as you can see, with the picture there, you get a good reflection. Almost good enough to do your makeup then, if you're that way inclined.
It's been, shall we say, somewhat rushed, but hopefully we've given you a little bit of understanding on what to look for in a paint job. There are a few key points. Choose the right paint system. Our boat painting guide will tell you that. It's got a lot of information. Secondly, prepare the surface. It's like 80% preparation, 20% the actual paint job.
No one likes sanding.
And then lastly, take your time, and try and get two of you to do the job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.